You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
You might put it on my YouTube. Anyway, I saw the game. I watched the game every
Well, we're here. I'm Bob Moats. Welcome to X's and Joe's, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball.
And I'm Mike Wiemuth, welcoming you to episode 33, Rally Behind the Bison, IU's Reclaiming of a Lost Icon, recorded on the afternoon of Friday, June 27th, 2025. So, Robert, I guess this is probably a dual first. This is the first time we've had two former IU student government presidents on the pod at the same time. Mm-hmm. And the first time we're recording with someone who's actually not on the same continent as us.
The time zone shuffling is intriguing, to say the least. This might also be, I'm not even sure we've ever actually done this on the network, Galen, where we've actually had someone internationally on one of our shows.
The closest, as I was telling Mike and you in the chat, I did the Signetti Emergency Hire podcast from my balcony in Kona on the Big Island of Hawaii, which is certainly over an ocean, but definitely not in another country. So this is breaking ground for the Back Home Network. My compliments, gentlemen.
Every once in a while, lightning strikes, or something about a dog. But moving along. Welcome, Cooper, President Cooper Tinsley. As he knows, you never lose the title. Cooper, we're glad you could come on the show. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you kind of came from, and what possessed you to actually want to run for and serve as a student body president.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for having me. So obviously, my name's Cooper Tinsley. I served as the 77th student body president at IU Bloomington. And then during that role, I was also chair of the All University Student Association, which, as you both know, kind of serves to connect the student governments of all 9 of IU's campuses. I was raised in a suburb of Indianapolis, Indiana. So I'm a homegrown Hoosier. And then I actually got my collegiate start at the University of Alabama. So I'm a transfer student to IU. And so I was at Bama for just one semester my freshman year. And by September, so within the month, I knew that I wanted to transfer to IU Bloomington. And so I made that transfer. And I was involved in student government in high school, and so I knew that was going to be something I wanted to be involved in. I never would have thought, though, at least then, that I would have been in the position that I was, kind of representing 50,000 students as opposed to like the 2,000 at my high school. And obviously, again, you both know, like, completely different situations, high school versus collegiate student government. But no, so I started in student government as director of academic affairs. And then through a transition became the chief of staff to the president that I was serving under that year. And then the next year, or I guess that spring, I launched my campaign with one of my closest friends who I met through student government too. And so her and I ran together, and then, come April, there we were. And it was a wild ride, but I'm really glad that we did it.
That's wonderful. And so you kind of mentioned the All University Students Association also, or we used to call it AUSA. Although I've heard it pronounced AUSA now. I've heard someone pronounce it differently recently. So it's really kind of cool. So what did you, if you could take back, you look back on the year, and you're only a couple months out of it, what do you think was the biggest thing that surprised you about how everyone kind of works together, or at times doesn't? What was kind of the revealing thing for you that you can kind of be like, man, didn't really know it worked that way?
Yeah. I mean, I got a lot of that as chief of staff before being president. And so that was a really great role to set me up, especially with the year that we had before my presidency. It was quite interesting, to say the least. But I mean, yeah, I think it's interesting because I think IUSG, for alum of the organization, they have like this kind of view that, the congressional branch and the executive branch are always like butting heads, which is often true. But I think during my year, I think it was like one of the cleanest that it had ever been, honestly, from what I've heard. And I think it just was like, over communication, and any issues that we had usually came from lack of communication. And so I think that's probably what surprised me the most of it in terms of like the working environment is like you can share an office with people, but if you don't speak to them, then it's just not gonna happen. And it was really important to us in the executive branch, and we tried to, and I think we successfully did, kind of bring out kind of this mission that every member of student government would feel, in that it's about service to the student body. And if personal issues were going to get in the way of that, then it might not be for you, or not, at least not in the same way. And so I think we achieved quite a few incredible things that I'm super proud of. And we were talking at the beginning, right before this show, like I'm super glad that we did it. Obviously there was like ups and downs, as there are with everything, but I think all in all we had a very successful year. So
that's awesome. Well, congratulations on a successful year, and congratulations on the fact that you're now sitting in Paris, France, and doing a study abroad, which beats some of us who just went back home and worked for the summer after our years. So, I think you win. Galen, how are you, my friend?
I am stellar. It's great to see you guys again.
We're glad you came on the show to talk about this process a little bit more. Yeah. I would just so go ahead, Mike. I
was going to ask Galen, where are you broadcasting from?
I am in Crimson Cast Studio B, which is just an office on the main floor of the house. I'm still restructuring the upstairs studio. We're getting it ready for football season, so this is kind of the aux studio, mostly because the golden retrievers get real sad when I go upstairs and don't invite them.
Okay. Just wondering, like, what oranges want of Bloomington are you broadcasting from?
Yeah, well, we do need to take the show on the road at some point. We'll have some news about that later on in the summer, but we've got for today, we're just escaping the heat. There's a really ornery robin in the mulch in front of the house that keeps squawking at me every time I walk in the house. So I don't know what to do about that exactly. But yeah, we're just chilling. We're looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome.
So before we get into that, let's we're going to talk a little bit about our title network sponsor, Home Field Apparel, who is your place to go for vintage-esque IU and other college, as well as other Indiana based t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats. And if you notice, Galen and I, without actually coordinating, decided to do the whole wear our version of the Bison, our IU Bison shirts today. And that's available, as well as other great Bison materials and gear and swag at Home Field Apparel. www.homefieldapparel.com. Mike, what are you seeing these days that's tripping your fancy?
Well, I saw that they have I guess they call them the mystery box.
Yes.
So those look really sort of interesting. I mean, I'm always down for some kind of like Monty Hall style marketing strategy when it comes to my clothing. And I actually checked out the website. If you go on there and you click on like the mystery box, it literally just shows you like the trace outline of a shirt. I think you get like 3 shirts and a pendant, but you have no idea exactly what the design is. So it is truly a mystery what they're sending you. So it's I'm kind of looking forward to just rolling the dice and seeing what I get when I make my order.
I will say it's great. I got so many cool shirts. The one summer I did that where they had like a 12-week one. I think 10 of them I still wear to this day. Unfortunately, one of the ones I had to give away because it was a University of Kentucky shirt. And there's some lines I refuse to cross, which remind my grandmother when IU won the 81 title, my grandmother was living in North Carolina, and she, for whatever reason, decided to send my family and me as an infant a North Carolina sweatsuit, for a baby. And my father This is in 1981, mind you, famously refused to let me wear it and then gave it away. So I'm just trying to continue that pattern as much as I possibly can.
Awesome. Oh, man. Yeah, but I think, but aside from the mystery box, they will have some more fall sports stuff coming out that usually hits, I think, around like late July, early August, I believe. So at least they did last year. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. So look for that and all the other great retro wear at homefieldapparel.com. And when we come back, we'll finally address the Bison. How did a dream become reality? Within the within IU student government and the IU community. Next on X's and Joes.
And welcome back to X's and Joes, where Mike and I are joined by Dr. Galen Clavio of the IU Media School and now former student body president Cooper Tinsley from last year. And we're going to kind of start this with Mike brought a special guest, another person who ran for student office in Bloomington. Who lives with Mike currently. This is Council at Large Lionel P. Twinkles, who ran with Mike as a student body vice presidential candidate back in the late 90s on the vast right-wing conspiracy ticket with our good friend Brian Cogswell, and good friend of the show, Brian Cogswell, I might add, as well as another. Did you have another furry friend that ran with you too?
Fesus T Lobster. He was a red stuffed lobster. He was, I think he was the VP for administration.
Yeah. So Cooper, we actually did take ourselves seriously to a certain point. Did you run into this sort of stuff? I mean, and before we get into this, because and I'll let Galen jump in here. We probably took ourselves way too seriously at times, which is why when Mike would jump out with this sort of stuff, it was like brilliant. But did you kind of run into some of this stuff, like kind of the parodying of this, of kind of what we're doing, or what people were doing on campus?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with it, you have to have fun with it, right? Like we were talking before the show, like it's an extremely stressful job. It's definitely like a 50 hour per week minimum job, and so you have to have fun with it. And if that is through running with a stuffed animal, or whether that is through fun bills like the one we're going to discuss here in a little bit. It has to happen. Otherwise, then it's really hard to keep going, if you're not having fun too. So
definitely have fun. Galen, what do you got? Was this your work here?
No, it was not mine. I just wanted to say, I find it harder and harder when I talk to students these days to explain the 90s. And I don't know that anybody really at the time realized how weird the 90s would look 25, 30 years hence. And so this to me is that picture is, first of all, it's not just Lionel. It's also that Mike appears to have gotten his inspiration for his dress here from Devo.
I think it was like Devo meets Huey Newton.
But it was funny, like as just a student when this was going on, it felt absurdist, but it also kind of matched how people felt generally about politics. Keep in mind, this was right at the height of the Clinton impeachment area, and it was pre 9/11. It felt both serious and frivolous simultaneously, and it in my mind feels like the last time that we were actually allowed to feel that way about anything political.
Right.
I would agree, because I think that it kind of does. You can kind of take things, and again, you're talking serious issues. You're talking very serious issues, and this is one reason when when the video was released, and I saw Galen at an IU student body Congress meeting, and I just kind of started laughing, because it's like, this is just because the voice vote and everything else, all that kind of. We'll post that in the show notes. To kind of throw out this, how did all that kind of germinate? Because Cooper, you kind of said it was, you had a very challenging year the year before, and the after effects of that challenging year, I know you inherited some of that when you came into office. And it's always challenging because I think one of the biggest misnomers that you have when you're talking to student leaders, well, if I had a nickel for every time a administrator, faculty member of the general public, whomever would say, so what do students feel about this? It's like at my time, there's 40,000 of us, and it's not a there are very few universal agreement points that you're going to find with 40,000 people living in any community, especially when it's diverse as IU Bloomington. So I guess from my viewpoint, when did all this kind of start for you getting hooked up with Galen and figuring out, okay, now is the time for the student body's leadership to step in and help?
So one thing that kind of inspired a lot of the work that I did as student body president was relied a lot on the history of what IUSG and previous names of the organization have done in the way that they went about doing it. And so I think this whole kind of thing started when obviously, we came off of a very hard year. In student government, but also just in general, student body nationwide, everything came into the fall semester of 2024. It didn't seem much better. It still seemed like the world was just falling apart everywhere. But the one really great thing was IU football, and I think that made what surprised a lot of people. I myself am not like a diehard football fan. I never have been. My dad and my brother are definitely those kinds of people, and I was kind of always just like sitting in the background, like I was just there for the nachos, to be honest. But no, I mean I absolutely loved it, and I was having a conversation. I think Mike or Bob, one of you mentioned that you served on the Bloomington Faculty Athletics Committee when. At some point, Bob. So I also was in that position. And so obviously I was connected with Scott Dolson, who's the vice president for intercollegiate athletics and the Bloomington athletics director. And so it was kind of just like this, honestly, just like this kind of chance thing. And I was like, there's not a lot of things that really like unify the student body in the way that football has this semester. And so it really started during one of those meetings or after that meeting. Probably sometime in November. I just like went up to Scott and I was like, I just thanked him. I was like, I just want to let you know, like from the student body's perspective, like there's not very many things that have done what Kurt and the football team have done in terms of, how students feel and the pride that they feel for their school. And that feeling is always constantly challenged, but football really brought it together. And so it started with that conversation, and then going back to kind of what IUSG had done in the past. When we had the Bison in the first place, it was actually through an act of IU student government in the very beginning. And so I was like, why not do that again? And so I talked to Scott about it, and kind of did the whole advocacy thing. Got together with Congress, worked with them on that, and then it kind of took off from there.
That's awesome. So to be honest, so when you mentioned Scott, I remember when I was at those meetings, he was usually 2 chairs away from me. So that's how long Scott's been in that room to kind of see that historical perspective and to kind of understand the importance of all this. And so at that point, so again, one of those organic things where it's like, okay, how can we help? And Galen, at this point, where were you guys at in the process?
Well, so one of the interesting things about this whole thing has been there's been a lot of wheels that have turned independently of each other, which all ended up rolling in the same direction at exactly the right time. And so when you say you guys, there wasn't really a you guys. There was, I would break it up into kind of 4 different buckets. But the central and most important point was IU athletics. Because, I knew a couple of months earlier from the time period that Cooper's talking about that there was clearly interest in trying to make this happen. But there had been resistance from not so much the upper levels of administration, but the bureaucracy of IU, particularly in relation to marks and logos and things like that. Historically, IU's been very conservative with their branding, as we all know. And it's worked. I mean, the Pitchfork IU logo is among the most recognizable university logos in the country. And that's got a lot of brand value. Obviously, a lot of this started as kind of a grassroots sort of thing. And I would date that all the way back to 2015, 2016. And it was our friends at Home Field Apparel who I kind of give the tip of the hat to for really getting the ball rolling with that hoodie that they released with, what I call the Knicks Bison on it. And that, I think, opened people's eyes to the idea that you could pair the Bison with the IU branding and it wasn't going to harm anything. And so then, that I had always been interested in the Bison. I think I've told this story before, but my parents had one of those crocheted rugs that had the Bison with the words Hoorie and Hoosiers underneath it that dated back to the 60s, back when the Bison was a going proposition for a few years as a mascot. I had been looking at that on the back of the couch where it hung when I grew up, since I was 6 or 7 years old. Then this starts in the mid 2010s, and there starts to be a little bit of groundswell. I find Professor Paul Gutjahr, or at the time it was, Associate Dean Paul Gutjahr, because he was with the college and in their front offices, and he had been pushing merchandise and really had been trying to run this almost guerrilla campaign to get people within the university structure interested. So I started helping him with passing merchandise out. And that was around the time that I started putting the Bring Back the Bison tag on Crimson Cast, which had a reach I was not anticipating. And so you put all those things together, and then suddenly there's an interest on the part of athletics. And I think athletics, and Scott Dolson and Jeremy Gray in particular, understood that if this was going to happen, it couldn't just be a guerrilla campaign on campus from a couple of professors. This was going to be something that the student body was going to have to embrace and push forward. And I think the last thing I'll say here is historically, that's how these things worked in colleges and universities in the late 1800s and 1900s. Yale became the Bulldogs because there was a bulldog that the student body decided they wanted to have represent them. Indiana went through several different incarnations of mascot types and settled on Hoosiers eventually, because I don't think anybody could really settle on anything else that worked out. And you saw that at universities across the country. That still has a lot of power. It's just that most universities are not at a point where you feel like you can touch the branding because it's all been so commercialized. But as we see, that's not necessarily always the case in things like this.
Right. Yeah, I'm curious. Galen or Cooper, you could answer this, but I'm probably maybe a little bit more interested in Cooper's perspective on this. The Bison obviously departed IU in the 60s. When this was going on, Cooper, was there any questioning or sort of pushback on just the idea of a Bison? It's like, wait a minute, why a Bison? What does that have to do with Indiana? So I'm just kind of curious, was there, any degree of resistance to this movement?
Yeah. So I don't think there was so much resistance in terms of why a Bison. I think it was pretty clear from the get-go. It's a historical relation to IU student government, but also the university broadly, but also obviously the state of Indiana, with it being kind of central to our state seal. But the idea of a mascot in general, I think, I don't know, Bob, if you remember kind of what passing bills and resolutions and stuff through the student body Congress was like, but there are some things that go that you think deserve a lot of heavy debate and that are passed in 2 minutes. And then there are some things that you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be super fun. And then 3 hours in, we're still having this conversation. And the Bring Back the Bison Act of 2024 was one of those things. I was astounded, truly. I was sitting in the back of this room. It was nearing midnight. And we were still having this conversation, and we still had the rest of our agenda to get to. This bill had just been introduced and just made it out of committee. But no, there was heavy debate. There really was. And a lot of it centered around their concern about the visual impact, I guess I'll say, of the previous Bison mascot. There was like so much concern that the original Bison costume was somehow going to come back, and they were like, they can't do that. I'm like, I've looked at obviously like this mascot, right? Like there are pictures of it, and I mean, I agree. It is like one of the ugliest things I've ever seen.
You've
right?
looked
like,
at it, like, and you're not in therapy currently, which I think is quite an accomplishment.
Right. I mean, it's like terrifying. Like it's like back legs are like double the size of its front legs. It has like the largest head that doesn't proportionally match the size of its body.
This I don't expect Cooper to get this reference, but if the movie Return to Oz was a mascot, the original Bison mascot would qualify.
It was a disaster. Well, and I mean, that doesn't even begin to touch on the other attempt of Mr. Hoosier Pride, which was I remember seeing him on
I think is the word you're looking for, Bob. It was offensive.
It was offensive. And I mean, there's a part of my psyche for being about 3 years old when that guy showed up where it's like, I mean, and so that's one of those types of deals that you think about. But Cooper, you hit the nail on the head because, there were plenty of times back of the room, front of the room, wherever, it's almost like, what are we doing? And I had 4 years of these meetings, I might add. The last one I went to was my last meeting. I don't even, on a reunion, they invited us to a banquet. I'm like, no, I'm going to Doncos with my wife, because it's not because I actually think it's more about the students, but the last thing was a bunch of old dudes sitting around there, and there were plenty of legacies that would hang out every once in a while for a couple of years after they were gone. No offense to anybody who's listening, but no, but the sort of, and I mean, sometimes it was just pure grandstanding. It was almost like, we're going to make, we want to be assured. Can we put an amendment in here that ensures that they're going to that we can burn the bison, the old bison costume in a that sort of, those sorts of things that you went through. I mean, I remember a debate on NAFTA where two friends of ours actually talked about the destruction of the United States economy and put that in as it was a 2-hour debate on NAFTA inside a student government. Yeah, and you know exactly who it is, and we're going to get a text message on this. We know we're going to get a text message on this. But it was like, sometimes it is kind of a national issue or an international issue. Sometimes it's something like, for us, it was student funding issues. Like there were times where people would just be arguing for hours on end about how much. No, just let them buy the cookies they want to buy. No one's going to lose their mind if they end up going to Dirty Dough versus this place, and they're having an event. It's their money. Let them spend it. But I hear you. So you guys navigated that pretty well. Then did the vote pass with an overwhelming majority?
Yeah. So I think it was funny because halfway through, I was beginning to kind of see that this. Again, like completely shocked, right? I was expecting this to be like a quick and easy, like, yeah, let's do this thing.
Yep.
Not only because of like, this is something fun, right? And we're never going to talk about fun things anymore. But also because, I mean, it would be great for the brand of IU student government, right? Like IUSG was known for many things, but among those was bringing the bison to IU in the 60s. Awesome. Right? And so it's kind of a great thing to be able to do this again. And I was like, no, like a lot of you in this room, you being me talking to Congress, was like, have concerns about IUSG not being able to get out there enough. Right. But like, this is like our opportunity to get our name out there. Like, this is one great thing we can do. And so obviously I was really like, expecting this to be like a 2-minute conversation max, but we're sitting here 3 hours in and still going. And so halfway through this meeting, we actually posted a poll to our Instagram and was like, hey, IU student body, who wants to bring back the bison type thing, right?
Oh, man.
And I'm sure both of you remember how difficult it is to engage the student body in any sort of conversation whatsoever.
Yeah.
But within like 3 minutes, we had like 750 responses. And
that's awesome.
I want to say it was like somewhere between 70 and 80% of students were like, hell yeah, let's bring it back.
Oh, I love it.
And so that definitely helped. We brought it up in the meeting, and then there was obviously the sticklers that were like, well, we should do like a full survey and whatever. It was like, okay. But no, I mean, it was, yeah. But anyways, eventually, it got through, 3 hours later. And it was definitely, I definitely think it was an overwhelming majority for sure. Definitely not unanimous, but there was definitely an overwhelming majority. And we had a little private celebratory signing ceremony in the back office when it finally got to my desk, like 2-3 days later. So yeah.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Well, would you imagine what it would have been like had we had Instagram back in our time? I mean, we talk all the time that we wouldn't be employed and we'd probably be sequestered from society had we had social media.
Can you imagine like any of our campaigns, especially like VRWC, obviously, but like any of us like active on?
I'm managing an IGA right now. Not doing what I'm doing right now. Social media would have ruined us all. So
yeah.
You're at least a manager. I think I'm bagging groceries for you, Galen. I think that's where I'm at in this conversation.
Bob, your break's over.
Mabel needs help getting it out to her Taurus. Yeah, it's so congratulations on that. That and that it is interesting that you bring that up because it is the stuff that's kind of completely unexpected, and you're like, I didn't even need to talk to any of you about this before the meeting because this is so damn obvious. Because you've been in enough conversations with people outside of the organization, and sometimes when it gets into like that almost internalized groupthink, and the genius stroke of in the middle of the meeting just going, all right, let's click on Instagram. Let's actually hear what your constituents are saying. Let's actually hear what the students are saying about it. So that's awesome. So anyway, when we come back from a short break, we're going to kind of delve into some other uses of social media. When some friends of mine were hitting me over the Facebook message about this Bison thing, and it kind of inspires our second segment when we get back on X's and Joe's.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Wiemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats, Cooper Tinsley, formerly of IU Student Government, and Galen Clavio of Galen Clavio Lore. So, Jess, we've covered how the Bison returned to IU. Now, I guess we kind of dig a little bit more into the why question. And as Bob said, and I didn't see exactly all of these texts, but I do know they're kind of floating out there as far as the maybe some of the reservations and pushback about just now that it's over. Okay, why the Bison? Why does this make any sense? So I would probably start with you, Galen. Like, given your advocacy for the Bison, over Leslie the last few years on the show, what's your best elevator speech to skeptical fans and alumni on why does the Bison make sense and why fans should, let's say, rally around the Bison going forward?
It centers around a few things. I mean, first of all, there is a clear historical precedent for this being affiliated with Indiana University. This was the original Bison territory in part. It stretched all the way to Pennsylvania and across the country. The Buffalo Trace, you've drank it, you know who you are. That was not just a brand name of a whiskey. That was an actual pathway that the Bison migrated in out of Kentucky through Indiana and into Illinois and the rest of the Midwest. And there's a reason it was on the state seal. It was a symbol of what the settlers found as they gradually moved up from the Ohio River and gradually assumed control of the land here in the state. So from the standpoint of there being an actual geographical tie historically, and hopefully as we move forward with conservation efforts bringing bison back across the state, there's a lot there. I also really do love the fact that the decision on the name ended up being Hoosier the Bison, because it actually gives the name Hoosier a tangible visual that is lacked essentially for its entire history. And, as I think many of you know, but some don't, the word Hoosier here in the state of Indiana has a very different meaning from the word Hoosier across the country, where it is often colloquially been used to describe a not very intelligent person. And the origins of Hoosier, we learned it in school. If you grew up in the state of Indiana, I'm assuming they're still teaching that in some way, shape, or form. But it's a lot of myth and it's a lot of uncertainty, and people seem fine with that. But people from Indiana, and particularly from Indiana University, I think there's a lot of pride in the name. And it's nice to have a symbol like the bison, hardworking animal, a dangerous animal if you cross it, but a placid animal that's got a role in the ecosystem. That's essentially what Hoosiers are in a nutshell. So I think that there's a great crossover there from a cultural and identification perspective. The last thing I'll say from a purely commercial and fan perspective, a lot of the resistance to mascots over the course of the last 40 years, I think, has been because when basketball got really, really good for its second era there from 1971 until about 1993, 94, you could make an argument the mascot was Bob Knight. And he had created a lot of traditions that we think of as long-standing within the university environment, like back to the beginning, when in reality, a lot of those were established in the early 1970s when the basketball program got going and started winning Big Ten titles and winning national titles. That's fine when you're still doing that. But when that goes away, successive generations, particularly of students, are looking for something to grab onto and don't want to be handcuffed to what feels like a very stuffy and not terribly inclusive set of traditions and visuals that don't really seem to represent anything modern, and also don't represent a lot of success. And when you look around the college sports landscape, most teams have mascots. Like, there's very few major college sports teams that don't have mascots, and particularly good football teams. Like, go through the list, and almost everybody's got something that you can point to, whether it's a nice, regal costumed person or just a person out with a sword and riding a horse, or something ridiculous like a large red fuzzy dot. I mean, there's something that you can identify that is separate from the logo. We haven't had that here. And I think especially it's hard to say whether this would have happened without football having the unicorn season that it had last year. But I think people realized when that occurred, wow, we're missing out on a whole world here, because we really didn't think about football as something that we needed to put forward in our branding and the way that we think about the university. So that's a really long elevator ride, obviously, that we just engaged in. But that's been the kind of the tripartite pitch that I've given to people, is that there's historical reasons, there's cultural reasons, and there's commercial reasons, all of which make a ton of sense. And if you do it correctly, which I believe that the university and the athletic department really have in this process, I think it's something that people can be proud of, people will get excited about, and it gives people just another thing that says Indiana. And that's really what you need in this environment where everybody's competing for attention.
Yeah. So, I think that point about the geographical relevance is kind of key, because that's definitely something I've kind of brought up with people that I know that have pushed back a little bit. Because you think about some other programs in college football and basketball. I mean, the geographic relevance of some of their mascots are absolutely comical. I mean, I'm the Bronze Age isn't exactly my strongest area of history, but I'm at least 95% certain that the Trojan War never quite reached the shores of East Lansing.
We don't know. It's possible that the Trojans, instead of landing in Rome, perhaps they sailed down the St. Lawrence Seaway. It's
possible.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Maybe, Helen left with the Trojans because Michigan didn't have enough In-N-Out burgers.
So,
even something like, let's take North Carolina.
Yeah.
A Tar Heel is not a ram. No. It has nothing to do with a ram. It is a nickname because of the state's historical prominence in the production of tar and pitch that dates back to the Civil War. But they picked something that's cool that doesn't have a lot of geographic. I mean, there are obviously rams all over the place, but it has very little to do with the actual name. That's where I think, to some degree, IU people have oftentimes gotten caught up too much in the why nots without trying to think about the possibilities of the whys.
Right.
Well, and Cooper, you have a very unique perspective because you spent time during football season at an SEC, not just an SAC school, one of the top Southeastern Conference powerhouses. Tailgating is different. Obviously, I mean, I've heard tailgating at Ole Miss. I'm sure it's very similar at Alabama, where it's almost a cocktail party affair. And you just have this. And Alabama is interesting because they're the Crimson Tide, and yet they have an elephant as a mascot. And it's almost one of those things where, as you kind of when you got back up to Indiana from Tuscaloosa, what were some of the differences you were seeing between how the students were engaging, with athletics in particular? And granted, I do know it was around the time of COVID too that you were dealing with this. You were going into this.
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of athletics, obviously, I mean, a huge difference, right? I think Alabama, they definitely have their tailgates, but Bryant-Denny Stadium was never empty.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first came in the first IU football game that I went to here, like half student section was full, and then a quarter of it was full by towards the end of the third quarter, right? Like it just like it didn't. There wasn't. It was. We were a tailgate school. We weren't a football school.
Right.
And I think that is very quickly changed with the season that we were having. Very quickly. And I think again what we talked about before, like I don't know if this would have happened without the season that we had. And it was kind of just like this perfect timing. And now I think students are so excited for this football season to come, not just for the tailgating, which obviously we all love, but I think they're excited to see what their football team can do. And I think that's a really great thing for multiple reasons, but even more so, like coming from Alabama, their mascot was not just for football. And it wasn't just for the athletic department or for sports either. I mean, it was involved in academics. It was involved in the learning experience. It was involvement experience. Like, I mean, they had different iterations of the costume, and it was everywhere, right? And so I think there's a lot of possibility for our mascot to become embedded into the university community outside of athletics. Like, I think it could be something that future students get to be involved with somehow, right? Like when I went and had my I don't even know what they call it, but like when my first day on campus at Bama, right? And we went to Bryant-Denny Stadium and we made the shape of a script A, and we took our picture from a drone above, and the elephant came out and met us, right? Like that is something that like defines this freshman student experience and the student experience more generally, and I think that's an opportunity that is worth taking for IU for sure.
Well, and I kind of think about that, because I'm thinking about just, the game day experiences, alumni experiences also. There is I'll put it this way. We used to have a thing in the 90s, and the three of us from that era will remember the battle cry of the student section was stand up old people. Like they were sitting, like they had to remove themselves from the seat for when Bob Knight threw the chair. And that they being, and in many cases, our parents and grandparents, had a different view of this. We're trying to get excited because this is our one crack at, student fandom. And it was almost like, why is this place like a mausoleum sometimes? Or why are you guys you just look mad to be here? Why are you mad to be here? And I'll grant you, Mike and I do this show. Galen does Crimson Cast. We get together and do some cross stuff all the time. We understand why the fan base was upset for a long period of time. We go into that in excruciatingly painful detail from time to time, frequently. So the point is, I think for the stand-up old people, which is kind of where I'm kind of addressing this whole thing with, Bison pushback. This is our moment to be the old people to stand up and say, hey, this is worth it. But it's also a kind of an area where it's like, we need to have maybe a more inclusive culture that actually hits generations that are between Cooper and us. Because I have a 2.5-year-old, Galen has young kids, Mike, you have a teenager, and we'll talk about this a little bit more after the break. But when IU comes to town for whatever, if there's an IU presence, a Bloomington athletics presence, how do you reach out to younger people, younger alums in particular, to get them excited? Because they don't have those moments of, well, we stole the dolphin and from the fountain and we dropped it off at the stadium and then we went to Kilroy's. And I know now it's upstairs, but back in our day it was Kilroy's. So what is kind of that's the sort of process. And as you kind of as you were kind of going through the student experience, where do you kind of see that sort of galvanization? I mean, do you see that galvanization being needed between the current students and really the past people that are still kind of in those seats? And I'm talking about me too. Okay, Cooper, you're on mute. You may hit your unmute button. All right, go again.
Thank you.
No problem.
I think it's future, present, and past students. Like I do think it's a generational thing that it's a generational experience, right? I think there's a lot of players that had their hand in making this happen, and it couldn't have been done without alumni either, right? And there was a lot of pushback, particularly from alumni, but also from current students when I was talking to them, and members of the Student Body Congress too, that were like, well, we're already the Hoosiers. Like, why do we need something else? And a confusion about like, well, are we going to be called the Bison now? What about like, what's going to happen to the Hoosiers? And I think just the experience that a physical, a tangible mascot can bring to all three of those generations, from the introduction of a student, whether they are 4 or 14, to the IU Bloomington community, to the 4-year, 5-year experience or now 3-year experience that students can have on the campus and attending those football games in the student section, to the rest of their lives after that, and being able to come back to Bloomington every so often and attend a football game or a basketball game. And at each one of those steps, you recognize the Bison. And I think that's it's not only a branding thing, like we've talked about with the trident, right? But it's just like there is something like so wholesome about that experience. And I really do think it has the opportunity to kind of define the student experience from pre, current, and post, being a student on the Bloomington campus.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it can be sort of like you said, Cooper, like a rallying symbol. The whole Constantine, in this sign you shall conquer idea. That, especially that we know that iconography is really useful for like representation of like team identity, and so if you have some kind of like flag to rally behind, or like obviously some visual, like you said, because Hoosiers is not something that is just easily identifiable, because it's not necessarily like a person per se. I think back when it was in Sports Illustrated, like several decades ago, when Penn State first jumped into the Big Ten, and there's this big article about like them joining, and it's like this 2-page of, I guess, it's basically just a drawing showing Penn's, like the Nittany Lion, literally in Pennsylvania. It's like just an overview of the map, walking towards the Midwest. And it shows like the Wolverine, the Boilermaker, all of them are just like on this like top, this like hill, looking down like menacingly at the Nittany Lion walking this way. And who did they have represented for IU? It was basically like this drawing of some like hayseed, literally with like, I think, a piece of straw sticking out of his mouth. It was definitely not, I would say, very
flattering.
Yeah, it was flattering. It was not flattering at all, and it definitely kind of upheld maybe some unfortunate perspectives of typical Indiana folk. So I think having something like a bison does kind of like, give you something like an alternative. And if it's done well, which is the most important part, if it is done well, marketed right, then it actually can be like a total net positive. And yeah, remember, some of the most popular mascots in college football and basketball in the past, many of them were actually fought against by some people. So not all of them were universally acclaimed when they first came into existence.
So yeah, just wait for the pictures coming out. If you're still on the fence on this bison thing, you're saying I'm not sure we should be doing this, or why the bison. Give it 6 months, see where we are.
I will say it's been interesting, and this is, I think, where sometimes people just assume things that they shouldn't. But the number of people, echoing what Cooper said, who thought that this was going to mean that we were going to become the Indiana Bison and that the Hoosiers was going away. I've seen that in probably 40 or 50 online comments. And I'm just like, no, that was never the idea. And so I do think that once people realize that nothing is being subtracted, and in fact, this is additive in nature, perhaps even the few holdouts that are out there will embrace it pretty quickly. I just think to some degree, people get used to things. They're afraid of change in general, particularly if they don't totally understand the implementation. But that's where you have to have a plan where you basically tell people you have to trust us on this because there's an implementation plan that's happening as part of a rollout to get this thing out there in a way that's going to make a big splash, because that goes towards making people more excited about it as it goes along. And so it's always a challenge launching anything new, especially in this era. I feel like the time to be creating mascots and nicknames was about 100 years ago, where you make the decision, you put it out there, and then people don't find out until the paper's delivered like 3 weeks later, and it's too late to do anything at that point. And now, it's the flip side of the Instagram poll that Cooper put out there, where you get instant feedback to support ideas, but you don't oftentimes get the runway to implement new ideas because people want to jump on it if they think that there's something they might not like.
Agreed. And I'm looking forward to kind of seeing how all this integrates here going into the fall and beyond. So when we come back on X's and Joe's, we're going to wrap things up with kind of just the excitement that we're all kind of feeling and kind of where we're seeing some things going with this. And just to kind of end on a high note when we come back on X's and Joe's.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Wiemuth, joined by Coach Bob Notes, Galen Clavio, and Cooper Tinsley. So Bob, you were saying that you were interested in Bennett getting to have some kind of interaction with the Bison. And it was funny, like when the news was kind of coming out, and I think I was like texting you about this. I think I was joking that, what we have to do just, to honor how this kind of came about. Maybe we have Clavio jump on top of a Bison and like ride triumphantly, like Hannibal returning to Carthage into like the stadium for the first game. But then I looked it up, and apparently Bison don't like to be ridden, especially in crowds where they can get a little bit jumpy. So
there was
like people that think they can ride zebras because they look like horses. That's not the way that they work. So
yeah, exactly.
I was visualizing there used to be like, I think it was either Ken Gross-Lewis had a hat, and he had this old cowboy hat that he wore, and I got to wear it once, in a homecoming parade. It was one of the trappings of Office Cooper, those things that they ask you, that's just like, okay, it's an honor to wear this goofy hat. I could just see, I would want Galen to pull that out for that event. But then I also remember about the same time we passed, we got the Bison thing and the announcement happened. There was some article on one of the some internet site that talked about somebody in like Yellowstone or Yosemite getting gored by a bison. And I almost put that out and saying, "Hey, look, this is a pretty tough animal we're talking about here. It's not just a burger, because I think that's what some people were kind of thinking. Someone actually brought up, why would you get a mascot you can eat? I sent her a picture of the Florida gator, and it's like you can eat just about anything if you really want to. But I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, the image of my kid with Bennett, who will stand in front of that, there's a TV over there, and before every game watches Martha the Mop Lady come down. Again, another unofficial mascot of Indiana University. It was an advertising thing. You kind of see these this sort of excitement where it's like the first stuffed bison that gets out on the market, I'm buying one.
Yeah.
And then I'm buying one for the cop's niece, who, I'm buying, Ryan's niece, my cousin, who's, she her kid deserves one too, even though she's a Purdue grad. and we're sending over. If their family lives in Bloomington, that's okay. We can do this. But it's I just see just that ability of just kind of interacting with younger fans. And my wife, who Cooper, you kind of hit the nail on the head earlier when you said that when you watch football, I used to be just kind of there for the nachos. For a lot of individuals, going and having a fan day experience that's not wrapped up in analytics and trying to figure out what's going on the field or the court. For a lot of fans, it's just we go because we have a good time. And I think that this, much like Boomer for the Pacers or Blue for the Colts, and you see just you drop Boomer into an elementary school. I mean, it's like Elvis shows up. It's the same thing. So I can see that kind of being a thing there with this that. We have the interactive, being more interactive. It's like user.
It's like Benny the Bull has been like the only good part of Bulls fandom for years now. Right. It's look. I worked in minor league sports as a broadcaster. We had a great mascot for my first full-time team that I worked for, the Roanoke Steam of Arena Football 2. We had a dragon named Stanley. I'm assuming because the steam aspect and Stanley, although I was contended dragons smoke, they don't steam, but that's another debate for another day. But that mascot, the guy that wore that costume, was great. Like he would pump the crowd up. He would get kids involved. Kids loved that dragon. It was a great centerpiece for casuals and young people who haven't fully gotten themselves into sicko, gonna go watch like what the edge rusher is doing in this defensive formation level of football. And I think to some degree, and it kind of connects back to the stand-up old people era, you have to remember that in sports marketing, there are multiple layers of fans. And you've got your hardcore fans who are there for the basketball or the football. You've got your mid-level fans who are there for the cultural aspects of connecting with the university and feeling important. And then you got your casual fans who are there for a good time. And that's what the Chick-fil-A drops are for. And that's what the crowd cam stuff is. And a mascot is a natural thing because we all grew, well, not all, I can't say all. Most of us grew up watching Saturday morning cartoons. We love fuzzy animals, or we love, in other cases, we like larger than life figures that aren't really people, but are instead like concepts. And IU, as to some degree, I think, in a combination of wanting to be overly traditionally focused, and be more akin to like an Ivy League school from an academic perspective. There's almost been a fear, I think, in certain academic circles that you don't want to make athletics too fun. The whole Murray Sperber bread and circuses thing. Like, God, no, we don't want that. But realistically, this is a big business. You're talking about, not just tens of millions of dollars in revenue coming in athletics, but you're talking about your university's nationwide and in some cases international branding. And that branding and marketing isn't just about the academics. It's about getting people to come to your school. Cooper, I don't know why you went to Alabama. I'm sure there were reasons for it, but Alabama, like the appeal to students in other states, it's largely been off of the marketing that they've gotten off their athletic programs. I mean, that's what spread the word. That Texas Tech right now is a household name in a lot of households in the country entirely because of what they're doing with athletics. The more you can throw into the mix there, where you can give people touch points to connect to the university and consider it, and then you get into the academics. You're like, wow, IU's an amazing school with amazing programs. Like, that's the name of the game. So, why limit yourself in those areas if you can do one thing that touches not just the in-arena experience and not just the tailgate experience, but also the marketing of the school and all the things you want people to access? It's really about getting them to know about it in the first place. And this is a great way to help with that.
Cooper, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I think the Bison offers us a very unique opportunity. I think it's been a long time coming. Obviously, there's been a lot of people that have done some work on this for quite a long time, and I'm happy that I was able to help IU student government kind of get involved this past year. And I think a lot of students they really took the Instagram soft launch with the videos coming out every few weeks to heart. I would get them sent to me almost immediately. They're like, "Is it coming back? Is it coming back?" And so there's this like building of excitement, and I think everybody's really excited to see what happens in the fall. And from kind of, in the back of my mind, we talk about how the title president never really leaves you. Honestly, I think I'm excited to see what happens with the football season and just our sports season in general with this new mascot. But I think I'm probably more genuinely excited to kind of see what this does for the student body in terms of our being able to connect with each other a little bit better than we have in the past.
Awesome, and would agree 100% with that. That's kind of the reason we do this. All of this that we talked about today is because that connectivity piece, and it's just so important to be able to find that ground that we can common ground we can all stand on and identify with.
It's funny. I just did an interview with a reporter from a national outlet. And Cooper, I gave him your email, so he'll be reaching out to you at some point here soon too, I think. But about this whole process, and he asked me at the end if there was anything else, because he had a bunch of questions about how everything went. But he asked me if there was anything else I wanted to say at the end, and I said, I'm a 3-time alum. I'm a 4th generation IU person. I've been a professor here for 16 years now, and if I contribute nothing else to the culture of IU than helping to bring the Bison mascot back and help to get it established, I'll feel like I accomplished a great deal while I was here. And it's been an honor to be a part of that in whatever small way. And it's just been really gratifying to watch other people pick up the idea and run with it and get it to the point where it could become a reality. And so it's just really cool watching this whole process unfold. And I think really it's easy to get cynical about processes. It's easy to get cynical about, well, things will never change. You can manifest these things into existence if you get the right people on board and people understand, like, there's a good rationale for this. Let's take out the question marks about why we shouldn't do it, and let's focus on why we should. And you can kind of accomplish anything at that point. So, that's my big take home point from this whole thing.
Well, we wish you the best luck, and we say thank you for coming on, Cooper, and making time out of your busy schedule, because I know that there's nothing else to do in Paris other than to talk to the three of us.
Especially 10 o'clock at night.
10 o'clock at night on a Friday. So you're getting the drink of your choice in 2 years of the next reunion. Definitely on me. And Galen,
Thank you for having me.
As always good to talk to you, man.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
So thanks to Bob Thompson for the music and sound of the show, and special thanks to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing the logo and the look of the show, to our producer, William McDermott, for cleaning up us as best as possible, and also for helping us locate Cooper, who he did yeoman's work in figuring out how to use the IU directory, which I should have been able to figure out pretty quickly. So special thanks to everyone that makes us look as good as we do.
Yep. And looking forward, next episode 34, negative recruiting. We'll explore the covert gamesmanship and, sometimes downright pettiness that programs wage against each other and chasing elite talent on the recruiting trail. So we'll be looking to record that one pretty soon. I think Bob and I, we're thinking maybe shooting that out maybe next week. So we'll have a pretty short turnaround this time around. So until then, this endless conversation was brought to you by the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the great BHN content, including the Assembly Call, Doing the Work, Right at Meridian, The Dribble Drive, and Crimson Cast on YouTube and backhomenetwork.com. So until next time, I'm Mike Wiemuth.
And I'm Bob Moats.
Take care, everybody. Or from your Paris, Pernay Swanby.
Very good.
My French is still pretty good.